Hi, everyone. This is in addition to our presentation that Camille and I offered on Wrinkling the Space-Time Continuum. There was a lot of neurobiology that felt relevant to constellations and to the story, but there wasn't time for it. So I'm going to try to do that in about a 10 to 20 minute piece of time. So here we go. The objectives for our presentation, the one at the bottom here about conditions that allow the learning and release of deeply held emotional memories. This fascinating work on memory reconsolidation, and I want to touch on that in this little second part of our presentation. In the story, Meg, Charles Wallace, and Calvin are transported to the planet Camazotz. And as it says in the story, there's this kind of rigidity. Everything's happening together, orchestrated, controlled, this conformity to the it. And this reminded me of Daniel Siegel's neurobiological definition of trauma, which really opened my eyes when I look at things and people now. Trauma is unintegrated material characterized by excessive rigidity, chaos, or both. Excessive chaos we're pretty familiar with, all hell breaking loose, things going crazy, nuts, so you can feel like, oh my God, nobody. But excessive rigidity is also often a sign of trauma. And that's something that I've started to learn, and now it just becomes automatic in my brain. Fundamentalism, fascism, super strictness, you can feel almost the energy that's enforcing the rigidity. It's not just, wow, everything's in order. It's like, and so that's really, these are some of the ways that it manifests. Also, for those of us who are looking at how to create social change and how to change patterns that are fixed, how to heal such systems. And A Wrinkle in Time, there was a rescue mission to Camazotz and the Power of Love. There's this thing that I find really helpful to me that I heard first from Thomas Hubel, who says, let's see if I can do this with my fingers right. He says there's three streams of the future. There's the emerging future, which is the creativity coming in, and there's the pattern future, which is just a repetition of the past, almost karma. Okay, it's like a broken record. This is a quote from his book, Attuned, by Eugene O'Neill. There's no present or future, only the past happening over and over again. And the pattern future has two streams. One of them is habit. You know, this is just how we've done it. I learned this, I learned a pattern. And habit is something you can train or coach or educate. However, the other thing that locks things in place, remember the rigidity, is trauma. And trauma does not do so well with education or coaching. It's like, why do we keep teaching people this and they can't stop doing the same thing? This is often a trauma pattern, and trauma needs to be healed by kind of unlocking the past or unlocking the pattern, witnessing it, bringing acknowledgement and presence to it, and tuning into a healthy life movement. And there's a lot about trauma healing. This is only going to talk really about constellations and memory reconsolidation. So some of what's involved in healing trauma is like finding what's in there. You know, what did we learn? We don't even know what are the magnets under the table, what's under the rug, facing it and acknowledging it, and then actually a restorative sequence, which we'll talk about, providing another experience. And the brain is neuroplastic, and it's like, oh, that's not true anymore. Now, this is now true now. And it's just part of an evolutionary capacity we have. So to say a little bit about constellations, and Camille may have said a lot of this already, so pardon the repetition, people say constellations reveal, or they make the invisible visible. And they often, almost like they show the fourth lines, the magnetic lines, and the people, the representatives are almost like iron filings that line up and show things. And so things like people that were excluded, loyalty bonds in a system, what's called identification in the realm of the dead. Let's say a mother lost her mother at a young age, and so she's always kind of looking for her mother, and so she can't really look at her child. They're actually with the dead and not the living in a way. Their souls there, even if they're going through the motions. Interrupted reaching out movements where the child stopped reaching out because he gave up, and other system dynamics. There's a great deal of things that constellations make visible. So this is interesting. This is from Bruce Ecker's book, and I'm going to quote him a lot, or the three of them, Bruce Ecker, Robin Tichik, and Laura Holley, Unlocking the Emotional Brain. It's a brilliant piece of work. Just at least read the case histories, even if the theories kind of a lot, which is revealing what was not seen, known, or felt, which of course constellations and other things, but constellations in depth therapy in particular are great at this. You know, in the story, kind of like, are we willing to face the darkness, go back in there? And interesting, when they studied therapy outcomes, like what makes a difference in a healing setting? Like what factors make a difference? Is it the kind of therapy? And a lot of people said the empathic connected relationship with a therapist is the most important thing. And actually in this study, that was about 11% of the difference. And actually what made most of the difference, 40%, was if you guide somebody to face something that they've been avoiding. Now, often you can't face something you've been avoided unless you have a really resonant empathic person with you. So the empathy, the resonance, the connection is super important. But if it's just connection and just resonance and not an encouragement to face what needs to be faced, there may not be so much change. So this feels really important. And of course, this conclusion from that paper is guiding awareness to bring attention to what's not been in awareness, what was not, appears to be a particularly important specific factor. So I want to point this out because it often can have almost like, it's a little bit like mother and father energy. It's like, okay, I'm going to nurture you, and now we need to look at this. And one without the other, trying to stick somebody's face in something, it's not going to go. You're going to flood somebody, but not encouraging the courage. It's like, Meg, you need to go to count the thoughts. And Mr. Murray, you're going to give your daughter the privilege of doing this in the story. Another big question, and this is kind of interesting, is what happens in a constellation real? And I could say a lot about this. I've been in 7 years of facilitator trainings. I've probably been in about 3,000 hours or more of constellation space, represented hundreds and hundreds of times. But I'm going to say, which is interesting, even if it wasn't real, it can still be healing. And this is what's fascinating. There's been so many synchronistic, can't be coincidental kind of events that have happened in constellations. But even if it were just imaginal, I want to point to how healing this can be. And there's actually a neurobiology for that. This comes from Ernest Rossi, a book I think about 30 years ago, in the psychobiology of mind-body healing, which is that memory is not like playing a CD. Actually, every time you pull up a memory, you're actually synthesizing a new experience. And it may be the same thing over and over again, but there's an opportunity for it to be reaccessed and reorganized. There's a potential for neuroplasticity. And we'll talk about this more in a minute. The mind does not distinguish between real and imagined threats. I think Sarah Payton quotes Ruth Lanius about this. I had a quote there before. I just pulled this out of Bruce Ecker's book. New experiences that are imaginal can also create new circuits. Why? Because the emotional centers in the subcortex, which in some ways don't have a lot of critical capacity, they hardly distinguish between something that really happened and something that's happening on the inside, something we're imagining, which is one of the values of mental rehearsals, and going over something in a different way. And so this allows something that may not be externally real to still have a healing positive effect. So I'll take a couple minutes about this because it's actually pretty transformative work. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the invention of antibiotics or anesthesia in medicine. It's a landmark difference. And Bruce Ecker, Robin Tichik, and Laura Hulley decided to study people are in therapies, all kinds of therapies, and maybe they have 50 sessions, but on this session they had a breakthrough. And like, was that just luck? Was that because they worked up to it? Or are there a certain combination of factors, like with a fire, right? You light a fire, sometimes it lights, sometimes it doesn't. And then you realize, oh, oxygen, fuel, or the things need to be a certain distance from each other. Like once you start to understand the principles of fire, you can light fires better and more consciously. And likewise, is there a certain sequence that doesn't just practice a new way of being, I'm afraid to go out in public, and now I'm going to actually do affirmations and I'm going to learn new ways of being, but is there actually a way to erase this one so that you don't have to keep doing this one to keep this one down? And like what they call a transformation is when the old emotional learning is erased. You still remember what happened. It's not like Men in Black where you erase your mind. So here this is. It's only when the new learning unwires the old learning, and then that no longer has power over you. And was there a formula for that? And they said yes. If you want a lot of information, look at their books, and they have videos. It's on the Coherence Therapy website, but they're not pushing coherence therapy. They say whenever the sequence happens, whether it's focusing-oriented therapy, AEDP, internal family systems, EMDR, any other kind of client-centered therapy, any other kind, when this happens, the person doesn't just have a positive experience, but it actually unlocks the old learning. And in his book, a lot of it's pretty theoretical and pretty technical, but there are incredible, about 10 or 12 case histories saying, this is an example of this in using accelerated emotional dynamic psychotherapy. Here's an example with Bonnie Badenoch's book using interpersonal neurobiology. These conditions were met in all these different things, but being aware of that, you can actually maximize the healing. And they happen in constellations, which he doesn't mention in his book, so I'm mentioning it here. So now I'm going to try to explain the formula. I'm just going to read this. The unlocking and transformational unlearning, meaning it's gone, occurs when the initial learning, like nobody will ever love me, I better not speak up, or something bad will happen. In a way, Sarah does some of this work with her unconscious vows. The target learning, the initial learning of don't speak up, I'm not worth anything, better to not try, if I'm angry, I'll be just like my parent and I'll never, And at the same time, the person also experiences something contradictory. So just an affirmation wow, I'm a good person, or somebody said, Bruce, you did that well. Okay, that's helpful. I love it. But if I were holding both, I feel pretty worthless, and somebody saying, Bruce, that was, real value to me, and I can be with them, the brain actually has about a 5-hour window where it will actually unlearn the old learning. And that's, disturbing emotional themes of a lifetime can be dispelled. They can be actually erased. the short version, and I think he says it different now, I think he calls it an expectation mismatch. When I learned it, it was juxtaposed positive disconfirming experiences, which means that I believe something. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. And I have an experience that's positive that disconfirms it. And they're both being held together. There's a reactivation of the old stuff. Oh my God. And there's a mismatch. It's contradicted, and they're both held. So here's an example from about 20 some years ago. I had come off of a divorce, and I made the horrible mistake. Don't ever do this. If somebody's leaving you and you ask them to tell me what's wrong with me, why'd you leave me? The person projects all this stuff. It's just such a dump. And I was like wide open, and it was, I mean, it took a couple of years to recover, and I had to explain some of my recovery. And I felt like I couldn't listen, I couldn't support, I wasn't safe. I mean, I was told all this crap. And unfortunately, because I was in a needy, vulnerable state, I just swallowed it and it went in. It was, and it activated some of my earlier stuff from when I was younger. So I'm at this conference, focusing conference, and I end up, we take some focusing turns, which is a listening practice of one person talking, the other person going. So I don't remember who went first. I may have gone first, and I shared, and she was listening. And then we swapped, and I'm like still carrying this. I'm kind of, I don't know. I mean, people say I can't listen. I'm not very safe. So like it had some emotional activity in my system. And I was there listening to this person. About 5 minutes into her turn, she starts weeping. And she says, I focus with the person who invented focusing. I focus with the foremost focusing professional in the world. I focus with this person. And I knew all these people's names. They're great people. She said, I've never felt so safe with another human being in my life. Reactivation, mismatch. And, it's like totally throws the old belief system. It did a huge job of like unlearning a lot of the way I carried myself. I think I was about a foot taller after that. But there's an example of a reactivation mismatch. In constellations, person comes in with a problem, and then we set up the constellation. There's representatives. And usually what will happen, of course, is that the representatives will start to illustrate or demonstrate the dysfunction in the system. Like, often the person will start crying and be, oh my God, that's exactly what it's like. So it's emotionally very active. It's like, oh my God, that's it. It's there. So we've activated the target learning. It may even have been something the person didn't even know, because constellations reveals things. Like, oh my God, that's exactly what my mother would say. It's exactly what my grandmother would do. And so that's active. And the facing what's not seen, of course, also can be really insightful. But then in addition, what can happen often in a constellation is either a healing movement or seeing the love or something that's said that's really true, that speaks to the soul. And Camille talked a lot about this already. But for example, my parents never saw me, but in the constellation, while this is happening, you're seeing in vivid three-dimensional space. Often if there's other representatives, the representative for the parent turns to face the representative for the client. Or you bring the client in and the representative for the parent, now you're having that person see them. And they're having a juxtaposed, disconfirming experience. Or there's all this guilt about an abortion, and in the constellation, the aborted baby sits at the feet of the woman. And the woman takes the baby into their heart. There's whatever was happening felt around that initially, and then this experience, or feeling the love and never felt loved, never felt connected, and all of a sudden having this connection experience. These things can be profoundly positively disconfirming and have the potential, just like other healing modalities, to unlock the emotional brain. One more, which is like, for example, oftentimes will happen in a constellation. The representative is looking at a parent, let's say the father, and the father is not looking toward them at all. They're looking off. And, it's pretty heartbreaking for the child. It's a reenactment. There it is. And then maybe the facilitator puts in a representative for somebody else that the father's looking at. And all of a sudden there's this awareness, oh, the father is identified with someone in the realm of the dead, somebody who's gone, who needs to be remembered or who they were missing. And so they couldn't see me. It's not happy ending, but it's disconfirms if the person was, they didn't love me because there was something wrong with me. They didn't love me because I was like, no, actually, this is about them. There's nothing wrong with me. They just weren't available. Another kind of fundamentally disconfirming experience. I hope that's helpful. I just thank you for your interest in this. It felt important to want to share this, especially because the Resonance Summit is also about neurobiology, and I wanted to be able to put this in here. Appreciate it. Best wishes.